Imagine the quarter mile exploding in fire and fury, a short, stocky legend with a cigar clenched tight, still slamming 4 speeds like a machine, defying NHRA's rulebook and daring anyone to stop him, only to learn years later that the same unbreakable Grumpy was secretly battling a failing heart, suffering multiple heart attacks in his final weeks, yet still building unbeatable engines right up to the end. What if the man who invented Pro Stock, outsmarted every factory team, and forced the rules to change, died on March 29, 2012 at 81, quietly recovering from a second heart attack, while the sport he built never told you the full, gut-wrenching truth? That was Bill Grumpy Jenkins, and this is the side NHRA buried. Buckle up, fellow fans, this gets real. So Grumpy hung up the helmet in 1976, not because he lost the fire, but because the real magic happened under the hood, not behind the wheel anymore. Picture it. After years of being the man in the seat, slamming those 4 speeds without a single miss for over 250 runs in 72, he stepped back and handed the keys to guys like Larry Lombardo and Ken Dondero. Lombardo took over midseason and went on to snag the 1976 NHRA Winston Pro Stock Championship. Yeah, the very first year without Grumpy driving full-time, his car still won the title. Dondero grabbed the NHRA crown that same year. That wasn't luck. That was Jenkins shifting his genius to full-time research and development, turning Jenkins' competition in Malvern, Pennsylvania, into a quiet powerhouse that kept pumping out winners long after the crowds stopped chanting his name from the stands. The early 80s saw him scale back the big match race circus, no more endless weekends chasing paychecks across the country. By 1983, he wrapped up his final full season as a team owner in Pro Stock. But retirement? That's not the word for what Grumpy did. He dove deeper into the shadows, focusing on comp eliminator engines, cylinder heads, and every tiny tweak that could squeeze another tenth out of a small block. He kept innovating splay valve heads, those angled valve designs that improved flow and power without breaking the rules, and fitted them into 358 cubic inch engines that became legends in their own right. Fast forward to 1998. Larry Kopp drives one of those Jenkins-built mills to the Winston Championship, a title that proved Grumpy's ideas were still dominating Pro Stock decades later. National event winners like Tim Freeman, Brad Jeter, Mark Osborne, Scott Perrin, Don Smith, and others all ran Jenkins' power that year. His engines weren't just winning, they were quietly rewriting efficiency, pushing over 2 horsepower per cubic inch on gasoline, no turbos, no blowers, pure mechanical wizardry that modern Pro Stock still builds on today. But here's where NHRA's official stories get a little thin, the part they rarely spotlighted in the big tributes. While the headlines chased the factory-backed stars and the flashy champions, Grumpy was quietly helping the underdogs, the small-town guys who showed up with a trailer and a dream instead of a corporate checkbook. Take the late 80s Pontiac engine project. A racer named Steve Ash from a small operation approached Grumpy with an idea to try some fresh concepts on a Pontiac mill, different architecture back then, when GM racers could pick Chevy, Pontiac, or Olds. Jenkins didn't just sell him parts. He kept him updated on progress, bought the pieces himself, and agreed to personally tune the engine at events. The result? That underdog combo qualified third at Gainesville, a huge national event, running against all the big-name teams. Grumpy was right there in the pits, wrenching between rounds, making sure the little guys had a shot. Stories like that floated around fan circles for years, but NHRA's big retrospectives? They focused on the championships, the top 8 ranking in 2001, the Halls of Fame inductions, Motorsports Hall in 96, International in 08, and left the quiet mentorship buried in the background. And it wasn't just engines. Fans who made the pilgrimage to Malvern in those years tell stories that humanize the gruff legend. One guy shows up with a custom Pro Stock Camaro he built, and Grumpy inspects it personally, offering tips without fanfare. Another time, at a PRI show or a random trackside chat, he'd drop real talk, like telling a young racer, "Son, there ain't no secrets, just hard work," with that trademark grunt and a half smile under the cigar. He bonded with folks over more than racing too. Aviation was a big one. He loved old planes like Six Trainers and Beechcraft Staggerwings, and if you brought that up, the grumpiness softened just a bit. Behind the no-nonsense attitude that earned him the nickname back in the 60s, short answers, little idle chatter when he was chasing performance, was a guy who quietly lifted others up. He helped small teams beat the odds, shared knowledge when he could have hoarded it, and kept the shop humming through the 80s and 90s like it was still 1972. Imagine this. The man NHRA ranked number 8 all-time in their 50th anniversary poll, the father of Pro Stock who forced the rulebook to bend, spending his retirement helping Missouri underdogs qualify third at Gainesville or powering Larry Kopp to a championship in '98. Was he too proud to brag about it? Or did NHRA just prefer the grumpy innovator image over the generous gearhead who quietly kept the little guys in the fight? You won't believe how far his influence reached into the 2000s, engines still roaring, shops still open, even as age started closing in. Hold that thought, because the final chapter gets even more personal. The 2000s arrived, and while most legends from the 70s had long since faded into memory or retirement homes, Bill Grumpy Jenkins was still in the fight, just not the way the crowds expected. The Malvern shop on Pennsylvania Avenue kept its doors open well into the mid-2000s, tools scattered, dyno humming, the smell of race fuel and hot metal lingering like it was 1972 all over again. Grumpy didn't chase national events anymore. Instead, he lent his wizardry to select teams, building and testing engines that carried his DNA straight into the modern pro stock wars. Dave Connolly, a young gun with fire in his eyes, hooked up with Jenkins' power in his Cobalt, and in 2005, that combination stormed to victory at the Winter Nationals, briefly putting Connolly at the top of the Powerade point standings. It wasn't just a win, it was proof that Grumpy's ideas, refined over decades, could still dominate against the latest factory-backed machines. Then in 2006, two-time champ Jim Yates announced a testing program with a Jenkins-built motor in his Pontiac GTO, a nod to the old master from the man who'd already proven himself multiple times over. Grumpy wasn't done. He was just working smarter, quieter, letting the horsepower do the talking while he stayed in the background, tweaking, testing, innovating. And in 2011, at age 80, he gave fans the ultimate gift, Grumpy's Toys, the authorized history of Grumpy Jenkins cars, a hardcover masterpiece penned with Doug Boyce. Jenkins himself wrote the foreword, approved every page, and poured in first-hand stories, clarifying myths, sharing secrets from his 17 legendary toys. The book chronicled everything from the early Chevy 2 to the Vega that changed pro stock forever, complete with never-before-seen build photos, personal collection shots, and tube chassis details from Pete Hutchinson at SRD Race Cars. It wasn't just a history book, it was Grumpy setting the record straight, separating fact from the tall tales that had grown around him for decades. Fans devoured it, and it became essential reading for anyone who ever loved the quarter mile. Here was the man who once barely had time for idle chatter now opening up, in print, at least about the cars that defined his life. But the shop visits, the occasional PRI show appearances, the quiet mentorship, those kept going too. Grumpy was gruff as ever, short answers, cigar in mouth, but the stories fans still tell paint a different picture. He'd drop real wisdom. There ain't no secrets, just hard work. He'd bond over aviation, his love for old planes like the AT-6 trainers and Beechcraft Staggerwings, or inspect a fan's project car without fanfare, offering tweaks that could shave tents. Behind the growl was a generous gearhead who'd helped underdogs for years, and in his later days, that side shone through more. He had a second wife, Polly Wood, who stood by him, children Susan, William T., Danielle, and Jennifer, even a grandson, Quinn Ewan. Family was there, quietly supporting the legend who spent most of his life chasing perfection in the pits. Then came the part NHRA's big tributes rarely lingered on, the human toll. Age was catching up, and Grumpy's heart began to betray him. In the weeks leading up to March 2012, he suffered multiple heart attacks. A couple, according to close friend Darwin Dahl, who was collaborating with him on a drag racing exhibit at the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. He was recovering from the second one, still pushing through the pain like he always did, too proud to complain, too stubborn to quit. On March 29, 2012, in Powley, Pennsylvania, not far from his beloved Malvern shop, Bill Tyler Jenkins passed away at 81 from heart failure. The news hit the pits like a blown tire. Tributes poured in from every corner. Warren Johnson called him irreplaceable, Bob Glidden praised the innovations, Don Prudhomme mourned the loss of a true pioneer. Dave Connolly said it hit me hard, remembering the hands-on mentor who'd shaped him into a champion crew chief. Even Snake, Prudhomme called just to talk about the Grump, admiration clear in every word. Imagine the irony, the man who outsmarted the entire NHRA, who forced rule changes overnight, who built engines that kept winning into the 2000s, couldn't outrun his own failing heart. He never whined about the attacks, never slowed down publicly. He just kept wrenching, kept sharing knowledge, kept being grumpy, right up until the end. What if NHRA had told the full story, the quiet recovery attempts, the pride that refused to admit weakness, The lovable old grump who mentored generations while his own clock was ticking. Fans flooded forums and tributes with memories. Burgers at Tulsa in the Vega days, autographs handed out with a grunt, a kid who got yelled at and loved every second of it. One fan got a McDonald's meal after racing, simple moments that meant more than any trophy. Why did the headlines focus on the championships and the innovations, but skim over the human battles? Why did the sport he helped elevate never fully spotlight the man who outlived the era he created with pure, unbreakable grit? This is the raw side they buried under the legend. And yet, the engines he built still echo. The book he authorized lives on. The stories fans share keep him roaring. Grumpy's final years weren't a fade to black. They were a masterclass in legacy, wrenching to the end, heart full of fire, even as it failed. The next chapter reveals the gems NHRA couldn't erase, and why the Grump remains the Wizard of Malvern forever. Stay with us, this ride ain't over yet. The man NHRA couldn't erase, deep untold gems. Now that we've walked through the fire of the glory days, the quiet shift to the shadows, and the heartbreaking final lap, let's pull back the curtain on the gems NHRA's official histories glossed over or simply couldn't capture. Bill Grumpy Jenkins wasn't just a driver, builder, or innovator, he was a force of nature wrapped in a stocky frame, a cigar, and a voice like gravel. And behind every headline about rule-bending controversies or record-shattering runs, there were layers of the man they rarely talked about, the ones that make the legend feel human, approachable, and even more unbreakable. Start with the nickname itself. Most fans know Grumpy came from his short, no-nonsense answers in the pits during the early 60s, a young mechanic too focused on performance to waste words. But before that, close friends called him Jigs, a throwback to his childhood, a softer side almost no one outside his inner circle ever heard. That contrast alone tells you everything. The world saw the gruff gearhead who grunted through interviews, but the people who knew him best saw a guy who could laugh, bond, and drop quiet wisdom when the moment called for it. Then there's the international chapter NHRA rarely highlights. In 1964, Grumpy joined the U.S. drag team for a historic tour of England, traveling with Dave Strickler and the factory-backed Chevys to show the Brits what American drag racing was made of. They ran exhibition matches at strips like Blackbush and Santa Pod, introducing nitro-burning monsters to crowds who'd never seen anything like it. Grumpy wasn't just along for the ride, he was wrenching, tuning, and representing. That trip planted seeds for international drag racing that grew for decades, yet in most NHRA retrospectives, it's a footnote at best. Because the big stories always stayed domestic, the Vega dominance, the pro-stock revolution, the rule changes he forced. But that overseas adventure showed the world what American horsepower could do, and Grumpy was right in the middle of it. Dig deeper, and the humor emerges, aside the gruff image almost hid completely. In the 70s, when Hot Rod magazine ran a famous Burt Reynolds-style centerfold parody, Grumpy posed for it, reclining on a fur rug, cigar in mouth, surrounded by his cars like a king on his throne. The shot was pure camp, pure fun. The same man who once stared down factory teams now winking at the camera. Fans who saw it live still chuckle about it. It humanized him, showed the playful streak beneath the growl. And then there were the casual moments. A McDonald's run after a race with a young fan, burgers and fries shared in the trailer, a quick autograph handed over with a grunt that somehow felt like approval, even yelling at a kid who got too close to the dyno, only for the kid to walk away grinning because Grumpy talked to me. The mentorship ran deeper than most know. Grumpy didn't hoard knowledge, he shared it with those who earned it. Small-town racers got phone calls with tuning tips, underdogs got engines or advice when they showed up at Malvern with respect and hustle. He told one young crew chief at a PRI show, "If you're able, do it right, no shortcuts." Simple words, but from the man who'd pioneered dry sump systems and splay valve heads, they carried weight like scripture. Even in his 70s and 80s, he'd take time for fans who made the pilgrimage, inspect their project cars, offer a nod or a critique, then disappear back to the bench. That generosity wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, like the heartbeat of the shop itself. And the aviation passion? Another hidden layer. Grumpy loved old planes, the AT-6 Texan trainers he flew in his younger days, the Beechcraft Staggerwings with their classic lines. If you brought up flying, the grumpiness melted, you'd get stories, tips, maybe even a rare smile. It was a reminder that the Wizard of Malvern wasn't just a drag racing machine, he was a man with passions beyond the quarter mile, hobbies that kept his mind sharp even as his body slowed. So why did NHRA never fully tell these stories? Their tributes, the top 50 drivers list, the Hall of Fame speeches, the the 75th anniversary nods, focused on the wins, the innovations, the father of pro stock title. They softened the controversies into brilliant rule-bending genius, instead of dwelling on the accusations. They celebrated the championships but skimmed the human cost, the pride that refused to complain about heart attacks, the quiet recovery in Pauli, the man who kept wrenching while his own engine was failing. Grumpy himself played into the image, short answers, cigar always lit, no time for fluff, but behind it was a guy who lifted others, laughed at parodies of himself, and shared secrets when it mattered. What if the real Grumpy wasn't the cheat NHRA sometimes painted, or even just the champ they honored, but the stubborn, generous, multifaceted man who outlived the era he created? What if the gruff exterior was armor, protecting a heart that mentored generations, loved old planes, posed for silly magazine spreads, and fought every battle in silence? Fans still share these gems in forums, at reunions, in comments under old videos. One guy got yelled at for touching a tool, and treasures the memory. Another got life advice over a cigar. These aren't headlines, they're the heartbeat that keeps the legend alive. NHRA couldn't erase him, no matter how much they focused on the trophies instead of the man. The engines he built still roar. The book he authorized still sits on shelves. The stories fans tell keep him in the pits. Grumpy Jenkins wasn't just a driver or a builder, he was us, passionate, flawed, brilliant, and unbreakable. And that's the truth they never fully told you. And so we come to the end of the road, or rather, the finish line that never really ends for Bill Grumpy Jenkins. From the roaring 60s and 70s when he bent the NHRA rulebook like a pretzel, through the quiet shadows of the 80s and 90s where he built champions without ever touching the seat again, to the final wrench turns in Malvern as his own heart quietly gave out. Grumpy's story isn't one of fade-out. It's one of unbreakable legacy. The shop may have eventually closed, the cigar smoke long since cleared from the air, but the engines he created? They're still thundering down strips in spirit, still powering the small blocks that chase tenths in today's pro stock wars. The innovations he pioneered, dry sump oiling, strut suspensions, splay valve heads, kick-out pans, live on in every modern drag car that runs a wedge or small block. The book he authorized in 2011, Grumpy's Toys, sits on shelves of fans who still flip through it like a Bible, finding new details in the photos, the build notes, the stories he finally let out. And the memories? Those are the loudest roar of all. Think about it. The man who once forced NHRA to rewrite rules just to keep him from dominating too hard, who earned $250,000 in '72 when that was unheard of money, who mentored underdogs in the pits and over cigars without ever asking for credit, he outlived the era he built. He died on March 29, 2012, at 81, in Pauli, Pennsylvania, after multiple heart attacks he fought in silence, too proud, too stubborn to let the world see him weaken. NHRA gave him the tributes, the top 8 all-time ranking, the halls of fame, the nods during their 75th anniversary celebrations, but they never fully told the human side. They celebrated the innovator, the father of pro stock, the guy who made the Vega a legend, but they softened the controversies into brilliant moves, skimmed the quiet generosity, and barely whispered about the heart attacks, the recovery attempts, the lovable old grump who kept wrenching right up to the end. They focused on the trophies. We remember the man. Because that's what keeps legends alive. Not just the wins, but the stories. The fan who got yelled at for touching a dyno tool and treasures the memory like gold. The kid who got life advice over a shared McDonald's meal after a race. The small-town racer who qualified third at Gainesville because Grumpy tuned the Pontiac mill himself between rounds. The hot rod parody pose where the gruff king reclined on a fur rug with his cigar and a grin. The overseas trip to England in '64, showing the world what American horsepower could do. The love for old planes, at 6 trainers and Beechcraft Staggerwings, that softened the growl when you brought it up. These aren't headlines. These are the heartbeat. These are the reasons fans still gather at reunions, still comment under old videos, still feel that quarter-mile rumble in their chest when they hear his name. Grumpy Jenkins proved something profound. Innovation doesn't die with the driver. It doesn't fade when the helmet comes off. It doesn't stop when the heart fails. It echoes, in the engines that still win, in the book that still teaches, in the underdogs who still race because someone once gave them a chance. He was us, passionate gearheads who chase perfection, stubborn enough to keep going, generous enough to share when it counts, flawed enough to be real. The gruff exterior was armor, but underneath beat a heart that refused to quit until it had to. So rest easy, legend. Your toy's still the fastest. Your secrets are out. Your influence roars on every strip across America. NHRA may have kept parts of the story quiet, but we, the fans who grew up on your thunder, we know the full truth. And we won't let it fade. If this hit you the way it hit me, if you still feel the rumble from the 70s, if Grumpy's story makes you proud to be a drag racing fan, smash that like button right now for the old man with the cigar. Subscribe if you want more untold NHRA tales, the scandals, the hidden heroes, the engines that changed everything. And most important, drop your favorite Grumpy memory in the comments below. Did you meet him? Get a grunt? See him at Malvern? Share it. Let's keep his memory roaring in every reply. Because as long as we tell these stories, Bill Grumpy Jenkins is still in the pits, still building, still unbeatable. Thank you for riding along, fellow fans. This one's for the Grump. Until next time, keep the hammer down.